He was the prey until he made the hunter bleed. The first thing Ren Marlowe tasted was blood. It wasn't the kind that filled your mouth after a brawl or a pulled tooth. This was dry, metallic, and wrong, coating the back of his throat like rusted iron scraped off a dead ship's hull. His eyes snapped open, blinding white. Ice crusted the inside of his helmet. A faint red light blinked in rhythm across his cracked visor. Emergency beacon. He moved or tried to. Pain shot through his ribs like a wire pulled too tight. He groaned, rolled sideways, and fell out of what was once a seat, but now looked more like a shattered coffin. The wind hit him next, high-pitched, shrieking across the broken fuselage, biting through the holes in his suit like the breath of something that didn't want him alive. The world around him was ash and snow. Virella 7. That was the name on the charts. A frost-bitten, mineral-rich rock orbiting a dying star. They'd come to scan it, map it, run the usual drills. But now the Meridian Scout 12 was a crumpled carcass half buried in an ice ridge. Smoke hissed from cracked metal. Glowing embers winked out one by one in the snow, and all the others were dead. Ren dragged himself across the broken hull, each movement a scream from his bruised lungs. Captain Orlis lay folded like a doll, half ejected through a side hatch, her suit torn open, eyes glassy. Tech Officer Sella's station had exploded inward, no chance there. He didn't look for the others. He knew. Something about this crash didn't sit right. There hadn't been a distress call. No warning from orbit. Just a sharp pull mid-flight, then chaos. Ren's memory fractured flames, alarms, a roar like something tearing through the sky. And then, nothing. He patched a seal in his suit, slung a salvage bag over his shoulder, and began to climb. The ridge behind the ship offered no warmth, no shelter, only height. But that meant vision. It meant maybe, just maybe, a signal. Every breath crystallized inside his mask. Every footfall crunched through layers of ancient, untouched snow. And then he stopped. There, in the perfect smoothness of the white expanse, were 3 depressions. Deep, wide. Not from the ship, not from falling debris. Too uniform, too deliberate. Footprints, large. And they weren't his. His breath caught in his chest. Something else had survived the crash. But no, these tracks were not human. Not with the talons spread that wide. Not with the spacing that precise. Whatever made them was moving with intent. Not wandering, not fleeing. It was hunting. Ren turned instinct prickling at the base of his neck. He scanned the ridges, the valleys of ice and wind-scoured stone. Nothing. Just endless white. But he felt it just outside the edges of sight. A presence, like being watched from underwater, cold, quiet, distant, calculating. He moved fast back toward the ship, grabbed what he could, rations of flare kit, the old analog scanner with the busted thermal plate, useless for tracking, good enough to fry a drone if he rewired it right. Then he vanished into the snow, not in panic, in strategy. Because Ren Marlowe wasn't just a geologist. He'd spent 6 years cataloging life on the edges of habitable systems. He knew predator tracks, knew the pause between steps meant stalking, not fleeing, knew that when a creature didn't make noise, it wasn't scared, it was confident. And this one was close. He found a crevice between 2 glacial plates, wedged himself into it, and covered the entrance with broken foil from the wreck. He killed the flare, switched off everything, sat in darkness, breathing shallow, muscles locked, mind racing. And in that blackness he heard it, a whisper against the ice, not wind, not mechanical, a subtle shift cloth brushing metal, a low exhale. A silhouette passed over the crack in the foil, tall, slender, non-human. It paused. Ren didn't breathe, and then it was gone. Whatever it was, it didn't attack. It didn't call out. It simply observed and moved on. But Ren knew one thing with certainty: it would be back. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't just surviving Virella 7. It was playing a game. And he had just become its newest piece. Kareth of the Emberclaw did not miss. She had been bred, trained, and sharpened to a point for one singular purpose: the perfect kill. In the arena pits of Vraxian Prime, they called her Ash Whisper, a name earned not from brutality, but from silence. No sound, no mercy, no failures. Until now. She crouched high on a ledge of fractured obsidian heat-sensitive optics, locked onto the fading thermal residue left behind by her target, the human. Ren Marlowe. His name had meant nothing to her when the hunt began. Just another biped. Another challenge tossed into the frost fields for the amusement of Crux Lux patrons with too many credits and not enough conscience. He wasn't even armed. That was the twist this time. Let's see how long he lasts. One of them had chuckled. 3 days later, Kareth was still chasing him. He'd slipped her snare trap in the ravine, evaded her scout drone by smearing thermite paste on a scavenged solar sheet, and then last night he'd triggered a decoy signal baiting her into a false heat signature, only to detonate a flare that blinded her optics and forced her to retreat into the dark, growling curses in her native tongue. She didn't retreat. She recalibrated. Now she watched the snow drift down across the basin like powdered bone. Her shoulders still ached from the rock slide he'd caused, a primitive trick, predicting a melt line using reflective glass from the wreck to nudge just enough heat onto a creaking overhang. It shouldn't have worked, but it had. Kareth narrowed her gaze. The Syndicate had told her this hunt would be brief. Entertain the elites, showcase her precision, kill the human quickly, cleanly, and drag his carcass to the beacon for display. She'd done worse before, but there had been something in his face when they locked eyes through the ice mist after that first ambush. Not fear, recognition. As if he saw her not as a monster, not as death, but as a variable, a problem to solve. That irritated her. That excited her. She leapt from the ridge without a sound, her booted feet gliding down the slope with a practiced slide. Snow parted for her. Ice gave way. Her form blurred low and sleek in her thermo-weave armor. She moved like a living flame through the frost. There, near the remains of a cargo pod, fresh signs. A boot print, shallow, deliberate, placed to be seen. A taunt. Kareth's lip curled. The human thought this was a game, but he didn't know who was playing. She activated her wrist interface, scrolling through the data feed, no sign of rescue craft. No anomalous movement from other sectors. The planet was quiet. Too quiet. Controlled. That meant containment grids were still active. No one was leaving. She knelt beside the print, touched the indentation. Still warm. He was close. Very close. And then a low tone echoed through her mask. Motion sensor. 6 meters. Behind her. Kareth spun twin blades in hand, but the snow was empty. Not empty. Above. She lunged sideways just as a sharp cascade of ice shards fell from a bent metal panel overhead, jagged, rusted, coated in a freezing agent from the ship's cryo system. It slammed into the spot she had just been standing. A trap. Another trap. She hissed through her teeth and rose. No serious injury, but her pride burned. This wasn't just luck anymore. He was adapting, thinking like a hunter. And for the first time, Kareth felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Who was this man? She replayed the earlier scan logs, the way he moved, the unpredictability, his resourcefulness, his refusal to panic. It was all wrong for a civilian scientist. And then she saw it. Buried in a corrupted registry file, his personnel profile. Ren Marlowe, former scout unit, Terran Wildlife Frontline, rank recon specialist, discharged with commendations. Of course, they'd told her he was just a geologist, but that was a lie. Someone had thrown her into this hunt blind and not by accident. She clenched her jaw, eyes narrowing. This was no longer a performance for bored elites. This was personal. She sheathed her blades, turned her head slowly to scan the wind-scoured horizon. "You're clever human," she murmured into the cold. "But you're not the only one who can learn." The hunt had changed. The rules were shifting. And for the first time, Kareth wasn't sure if she was the predator or the prey. Ren Marlowe didn't believe in miracles. Survival wasn't about luck. It was about pattern recognition, about listening to the terrain, reading the temperature shifts, spotting what didn't belong. And right now, something didn't belong. He crouched low under a jagged outcrop of rock glass, wind howling past him in furious bursts. He'd been on Varela 7 for 6 days. Alone, hunted, sleeping in half-hour bursts beneath scavenged insulation, eating ration gel that froze the moment it hit air, and watching his pulse grow weaker on a cracked med band. But he was still alive. She hadn't expected that. He'd seen her twice now. Once through the mist, her silhouette tall and lean, gliding across a cliff edge with no visible breath or noise. And once in a reflection distorted by a frozen lake, her twin blades shimmering like teeth in the snow. She was faster, stronger, and armed with tech a century ahead of his. But Ren had something she didn't time, and he was using it to unmake her. He lured her across a boiling fissure field, laying broken circuit coils just beneath the snow. When she stepped on one, it shorted her cloaking rig for 23 seconds. He used those seconds to escape and to plant more surprises. He knew how apex predators hunted. Fast, direct, arrogant. But endurance was a human thing. He set false trails loops where his footprints ended at a cliffside only to continue half a kilometer away using glider fabric from the wreck. He left heat markers soaked in his own sweat stashed in dead drones, triggering her proximity alerts just long enough to draw her off course. And then came the storm. A wall of white and ice ripping across the basin with teeth of glass. A Varela blizzard didn't just kill it, erased. Visibility dropped to inches. No sensor could cut through it. No HUD could filter it. But Ren didn't panic. He'd been waiting for it. Because the storm didn't care how sharp your blades were. The storm leveled the field. Ren moved like a ghost through the ice. He knew where the wind would cut hardest, where the thermal pockets formed under the snowdrifts. He found one, an old magma vent frozen over but still warm enough to keep him alive for a few hours. And then he baited her. He left a flickering heat signature in the open, a makeshift campfire using chemically treated wires and gel pack cores, just enough to glow on thermal scans. He waited nearby. He watched her descend into the trap. The moment her boots touched down, the ground beneath gave way. Snow hiding a crude drop pit carved with heat tools and lined with insulation foil. Not deep enough to wound her, just enough to make her fall. She didn't scream, didn't even grunt. But when she stood up slowly, carefully brushing ice from her armor, he saw it in her body language. Hesitation. Kareth of the Emberclaw, perfect huntress, unbreakable predator, was starting to doubt herself. Ren didn't celebrate. He just moved again. Always ahead, always gone. Because he knew something else too. Predators break two ways: when challenged, they adapt, or they unravel. And she hadn't decided which one she was yet. By the third night of the storm, he was holed up in a frozen fissure limbs, shaking eyes bloodshot. The med band read borderline hypothermia. He didn't care. Not yet. He watched the snow outside swirl into unnatural patterns. She was close again. He'd learned to tell not by sight or sound, but by absence. When the air felt too still, when birds didn't screech from the canyons, when the wind refused to touch the ground, that was when she was near. And yet she didn't strike. Not anymore. She studied, watched, mirrored. Good, he thought. Let her learn. Let her grow uncertain. Let her feel human. He chewed on the last protein strip from the crash kit and leaned against the stone eyes flickering shut. Tomorrow he'd trigger the avalanche. Tomorrow he'd end this phase of the game. But tonight he smiled faintly to himself through chattering teeth. She'd never expected a human to survive this long. She'd never expected one to make her sweat. And deep in her perfect, flawless mind, that scared her more than she could admit. Kareth hit the snow hard. The impact rattled her armor and knocked the breath from her lungs, not from the force alone, but from the humiliation. She rolled onto her side blades, ready sensors flickering with interference, and stared up at the shattered ice shelf above. The one Ren had deliberately weakened. He had known. He had mapped the crevasse and timed the melt, lured her in, triggered the shift with a thermal spike from his jury-rigged emitter, and watched as tons of jagged snow and rock collapsed onto her. He was no longer running. He was hunting back. Her rifle was gone, buried somewhere in the debris or snapped in the fall. One of her blade hilts was cracked. Blood, dark and viscous, leaked from a split in her shoulder plate. Pain flared as she stood, but she pushed through it. She always did. Kareth of Emberclaw did not quit. But something had changed. She moved slower now. Her vision blurred at the edges. She'd taken wounds before burns, breaks, crush injuries. But never from prey. Never from someone she underestimated. And now he was gone again. The human. Ren. She hated that she knew his name now. Hated that it echoed in her head louder than her mission parameters. Hated that she'd started watching his traps with something more than calculation. Admiration. She scanned the terrain through her cracked visor, wincing as the cold crept under her skin. The storm had passed, but the temperature was still plummeting. Clouds thinned above, revealing Varella's pale twin moons, casting faint silver over the scarred snowfields. Then movement. A shimmer brief, barely there. Kareth turned too late. Ren burst from the ridge above a narrow shard of plasteel in hand, aimed not at her chest, but at the emitter pack on her back. Smart. The blow struck and her vision flared with static. Her HUD shorted out entirely. She dropped to a knee, spun with a snarl, and swept his legs out from under him. They tumbled into the snow together. Fists, elbows, a clash of survival. No elegance, no discipline, just raw, wild collision. Ren fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Every punch was personal, every movement desperate but precise. He wasn't faster, Kareth still had the edge, but he anticipated. He read her. Turned her strengths into liabilities, shifted his weight just enough to redirect her strikes. And then with her knee pressed to his chest and one blade drawn to finish it, he stopped fighting. His eyes met hers not with rage or fear, but recognition. He saw the pain in her shoulder, the way her grip faltered, and he didn't take the opening. Instead, he reached up, grabbed her wrist, and gently pulled the blade away. Kareth froze. Time fractured. No one had ever shown her mercy in the hunt. Not once. Not in the pits. Not on the battlefield. Not in the years of silent assignments where life and death were commodities traded by syndicates who saw her as nothing but a weapon. Ren Marlowe saw her. Not as prey. Not even as predator. As a person. She staggered back, blade falling into the snow. Confusion poured into her like frost water through a crack in armor. She didn't know what she felt. Rage, shame, awe, something unnamed and ancient. He could have killed her. Instead, he saved her. Why she managed to rasp through bruised lips, breath fogging. Ren didn't answer right away. He knelt beside her, scanning the damage to her shoulder, tugging a med patch from his pack with numb fingers. Because he said quietly, pressing it into place, someone just turned this into something uglier than a hunt. Their eyes locked again. In that moment, neither was human. Neither was alien. Neither was hunter or hunted. Just two survivors caught in a game they never agreed to play. Kareth looked down at the med patch, then at the broken snow, then at her own shaking hands. She had crossed galaxies to perfect the kill. Now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted to finish it. The cave was alive with breath. Not theirs, but the planet's. Ren had found it beneath a crumbling ridge where the snow softened and steamed. A geothermal vent ran under the rocks, exhaling heat through a series of narrow fissures. It wasn't much, but in a world made of knives and ice, it was enough. Warmth, shelter, a moment to not die. Kareth sat with her back against the wall, half in shadow, one arm stripped of armor to reveal the strange lattice of veins threading beneath her copper skin. The med patch pulsed faint blue on her shoulder. Ren crouched beside a cobbled-together heat lamp, splicing broken wires with a steadier hand than he thought he still had. No words passed between them for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward. It was earned. Then Kareth spoke low and deliberate. "You knew this cave would be here." Ren didn't look up. Survey maps, scanned thermal signatures before the crash. "Figured if I ever got stuck out here, I'd need a way to not freeze to death." "You plan like a predator. I used to track wild drakes on Alien 3. They don't forgive mistakes." She let the silence breathe again. Then quieter. "Neither do I." He glanced at her. And just like that, the barrier cracked. Ren shifted to his pack, pulled out a busted nav board from the crash. Not much of it still functioned. The screen flickered, distorted. But the wrist module he'd taken from her gear, the one she'd lost during their earlier clash, that still had power. He held it up. "Mind if I take a look?" Kareth tensed for a moment. Then nodded. He connected the module to the nav board with a frayed cord. The interface glitched, then blinked to life. Strings of alien glyphs scrolled across the screen, encrypted proprietary code wrapped in a shell of Crux Lux security. Ren frowned. Didn't realize bounty syndicates had this level of lockdown. "They don't," she said flatly. "That isn't standard. That's higher clearance." Ren typed a command into the override. Nothing. He tried again, layering a decryption key he'd salvaged from a broken comms relay. Click. Something unlocked. The display shifted. A black screen. A list of coordinates. A file folder labeled Varela 7 Active Playgrounds. Kareth moved closer, eyes narrowing. "What is that?" Ren opened the folder. Data streamed down the screen: logs, recordings, bioscans, statistics. Ren's name, a dozen others, races and species he didn't recognize, all marked with tags, hunt scheduled, odds placed, asset deployed. And then the most damning entry: initiator Crux Lux, overseer Vorik Dal, authorization unofficial, risk category red level entertainment. Kareth stared, her breath caught. "This wasn't sanctioned," she whispered. "This wasn't part of the Accords. This was murder," Ren said flatly. "Dressed up as sport." The truth settled over the cave like dust. Varela 7 wasn't just a survey site. It was a preserve, a slaughterhouse hidden under layers of fake research permits and ghost signals. Sentient beings were being hunted here not for justice or threat containment, but for gambling. Kareth's hands clenched. All her victories, all her missions. She had always believed in rules, a code, honor, even in death. But this was wrong. "How many have died here?" she asked, voice cold. Ren scrolled. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. The logs go back 20 years, and no one knows. They made sure of that. No outgoing transmissions, no tribunal oversight, no survivors." Kareth rose slowly. The firelight cast shadows across her face that made her look older, hardened by betrayal. "I was a weapon," she said, as if spitting glass. "They used me." Ren stood with her. "Then help me expose them." She turned, eyes burning with something more than anger. Purpose. He handed her the wrist module. "We get this to the Accord Tribunal. Blow the whole system wide open." Kareth nodded, silent. And in that moment, the lines between them vanished completely. They were no longer predator and prey. They were something more dangerous. Allies. And the game had just flipped. The next morning, the wind died. It wasn't natural. Ren knew that immediately. Varela's weather patterns didn't pause, they relented briefly before hammering again with renewed force. But now, as he and Kareth climbed the black ridge overlooking the eastern flats, the air was still, too still. Kareth crouched beside him, visor engaged, scanning the horizon with eyes narrowed behind the cracked lens. "Look," she said quietly. And there it was. Below them stretched a valley carved into perfect symmetry, unnatural, too smooth to be erosion. Polished steel domes rose from the snow like buried eggs, each marked with Crux Lux insignias almost invisible to satellite eyes. From the surface, it was a desolate tundra, but beneath a living structure, pulsing, breathing. Vorik Dahl's operation. Ren adjusted the zoom on his salvaged scope. Those aren't buildings. They're environmental shells. The storm can't touch what's inside. And that Kareth said, pointing to the central dome with the crimson beacon, is the control hub, where he watches. Ren pulled out the wrist module and decrypted another file, this one labeled Playground Control Interface, Virella 7. Inside were protocols, when to deploy synthetic pursuers, how to stage events, when to trigger lethal anomalies. The entire landscape was curated, programmed. A sandbox of slaughter. Kareth's jaw clenched. This planet is a lie. He made it into a game board. Ren stared at the horizon, his breath clouding the glass. He could almost hear Vorik's voice, arrogant, amused, playing God behind some luxury control room on the far side of the dome. "Who is he, really?" he asked. Kareth's reply was immediate. A shadow broker, one of Crux Lux's inner circle, former weapons contractor, known to fund live events wagers on war outcomes, assassin trials. But this is his masterpiece. They descended toward the edge of the preserve. As they crept closer to the dome perimeter, the snow beneath their feet turned gritty, coated in ash. Bones protruded from the drift. Not animal bones. Some had armor remnants. Others had tags still clinging to what was left of fleshless wrists. "They were hunted here," Ren said. "Right where we're standing." Kareth said nothing. She reached down and picked up a helmet scorched split down the middle. Inside, something flickered. A camera node. Ren knelt. Recording equipment. These weren't just kills. They were broadcasts. He activated the node. A flickering hollow emerged, shaky and distorted. A wide-eyed alien no older than 20 sprinting through a ravine. A drone zipped above her, following every step. Her breathing was ragged. She slipped. A plasma bolt struck her back. She screamed once, then went still. The feed ended. Kareth crushed the node with one boot. "I want to burn him," she whispered. "I want him to feel it when it ends." Ren looked at her. Really looked. She was no longer the cold, lethal figure who had stalked him for days. There was fury in her now. Fury and purpose. It mirrored his own. He stood, took out the nav board and laid it flat in the snow. "Then we take the dome. We get inside. We download every log, every file, every feed he ever recorded. And we show the galaxy what he's done." Kareth nodded slowly. "But first," she said, "we give him something to fear." That night they made their first move. They struck a fuel relay station on the outer perimeter, disabled the beacon, sabotaged the power cores, then tagged the location with the Interstellar Accord distress symbol carved into the ice. A message. Not for help. For war. By the time the Crux Lux technicians arrived to investigate, the flames were already visible from the control dome. And on one of the surveillance monitors in the command center, Vorik Dahl stood watching a glass of blood-colored wine in one hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked amused. So he said to the empty room, raising his glass toward the screen, "The game's getting interesting." His voice echoed against polished walls. "Let's see how far the little hunter and her pet human make it." Then he smiled and pressed a button. "Kill Protocol A7 active. Let the final hunt begin." The explosion lit the sky like a second sun. Ren and Kareth watched from the ridge as the fuel depot burned, columns of black smoke rising high over the snowfields of Virella 7. The flames painted the ice in orange hues, dancing across fractured terrain like defiant brushstrokes against a canvas of cruelty. "That'll get his attention," Ren muttered, shielding his eyes. Kareth didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her expression said everything: sharp, controlled, furious. But beneath that fire was a new steel. Purpose. Direction. She wasn't hunting anymore. She was fighting back. They moved quickly through the canyon systems, staying off the grid, bypassing trip drones and sentry fields. Kareth taught Ren the patterns of Vorik's synthetic guardians, how they scanned, how they smelled. Ren, in turn, mapped terrain weaknesses, fault lines in the glacier overhangs, ready-to-fall thermal pockets that masked movement. They were different in every way, fire and frost, precision and improvisation, but together they were lethal. And they weren't alone for long. On the third night, they stumbled upon a shallow ravine peppered with signal pings barely detectable, camouflaged to look like geological interference. But Ren noticed the rhythm. A pattern. Morse, almost. Desperate. They found the source under a collapsed drone tower. A small figure trembling in the cold. Not human. Not Emberclaw. Something else entirely: greenish skin, spindly limbs, wide bioluminescent eyes. Half-starved. Shackled. "Name?" Kareth asked softly, kneeling beside him. He croaked the answer in broken standard. "T-Vic. Runner class. They took us. 47 of us. I'm all that's left." Ren's jaw clenched. "How long?" T-Vic blinked. 9 cycles. Hunted for sport. We were a warm-up. Not premium enough for the broadcasts." Kareth's hand curled into a fist. They freed him, fed him, carried him when he collapsed from exhaustion. T-Vic knew things: secret access hatches, emergency maintenance corridors the hunters never used. He'd hidden there for weeks beneath the floorboards of death. He had seen the feeding rooms, the body disposal shafts, and worse, he'd seen the vault, the place where Vorik kept records, footage, biometric logs of every kill. "This is it," Ren said later, staring at the makeshift map drawn in the dirt. "This is how we bury Crux Lux." They began hitting outposts one by one, quick strikes not for sabotage but for evidence. Kareth would extract files. Ren would disable comms. T-Vic would overload the failsafes. In 2 weeks, they built a library of horrors: every name, every death, every bet placed by the elite. Kareth watched one feed in silence, her own from years ago. A clean kill in a controlled canyon. Applause followed. Laughter. Wager stats scrolling across the bottom of the screen. She turned it off. "This ends now," she whispered. Ren placed a hand on her shoulder. Not as a comfort, but as a promise. They were no longer prey. They were no longer participants. They were witnesses. And they were building a case that could collapse an empire. Late one night, Kareth sat by the fire, sharpening her blades. Ren sat across from her, checking the thermal charges for the assault to come. He looked up. "Do you think they'll listen the accord?" she asked. "They'll have no choice. I mean, after all this. After what we did. What you did." Kareth looked into the flames. "I was a weapon. Now I'm a warning." Ren smiled, tired but honest. Not just a warning. A reckoning. T-Vic snored softly in the corner, curled beside a salvaged heat lamp. Tomorrow they would hit the central dome. Tomorrow they would face Vorik. Not as his entertainment. Not as his monsters. But as the nightmare he created and could no longer control. The blizzard broke at dawn. It was almost poetic the way the storm peeled back just enough to reveal Vorik Dahl's fortress standing like a steel parasite at the heart of the ice. The dome gleamed under the pale twin suns, its curved walls breathing with the hum of buried machinery, reflecting light like the skin of a beast that had never known pain. Not yet. Kareth stood at the edge of the ridge, wind catching the folds of her cloak. Beside her, Ren double-checked the thermal charges on his belt. T-Vic crouched behind them, eyes glowing with a mix of fear and anticipation. "This is the only entrance?" Ren asked, nodding toward the ventilation shaft embedded into the mountainside behind the dome. Kareth answered without looking. "It's not an entrance. It's an exhaust system. We crawl in through that, follow the maintenance shaft down, and breach through the operations wing. They won't expect an assault from the incineration chute." Ren gave a crooked smile. "Lovely. Smells like poetic justice." They moved. The shaft was narrow and alive with heat. As they climbed down the reinforced tunnel, every inch felt tighter, the metal groaning faintly with pressure changes. Tvik led his fingers nimble disabling sensors with a quiet efficiency learned through survival. Then, they dropped into darkness. The inner facility wasn't like the outposts they'd sabotaged. It was colder, cleaner, clinical, sterile. The kind of cold that didn't come from temperature but from purpose. White hallways stretched out before them, humming with energy. Drones hovered overhead. Monitors pulsed with telemetry data from across the preserve. Every step deeper was a descent into a world built on blood. They passed walls covered in trophy holograms, still frames of sentient prey caught mid-death with betting odds and timestamps underneath. Audio feeds from distant lounges piped through the walls where the ultra-rich placed real-time wagers from orbiting pleasure yachts. "Monsters," Kareth muttered. "No," Ren said. "They paid the monsters." Then the alarm hit, a deep guttural chime that echoed across every surface. The drone's stirred lights flickered red and security shutters began slamming into place. "Go," Ren shouted. Plan B. Kareth pivoted, tossing a charge at the ceiling. The blast blew through an overhead panel, and she launched herself up, blades drawn, slashing through the nearest synthetic guardian with brutal precision. Ren and Tvik darted through the chaos, heading for the command wing. The corridors shifted around them, walls retracting floors, reshaping a death maze designed to isolate prey. But Tvik had memorized every twist. They reached the core. A massive control room sat behind transparent alloy walls, and at its center, reclining like a smug god atop a throne of tech, was Vorik Dahl. Tall, immaculate, wearing a black formal tunic stitched with golden thread. He looked more like a diplomat than a warlord. His eyes were pale and glassy, like someone who had spent too long looking at lives through a screen. "Well," he said smoothly as the door sealed behind them, "I must admit. I didn't see this ending with a rescue mission from the Ice Queen herself." Kareth stepped forward, weapons at her sides, face unreadable. "Shut it down," she said. Vorik smiled. "Why would I?" "You're still performing." He tapped a key on his chair. Monitors lit up Kareth in the vents. Ren bleeding by a canyon wall. Tvik crying in the snow. "Do you think this wasn't part of the show?" Vorik continued. "You turning against me? It's perfect. Do you know how much they're betting on you right now? A former apex hunter and a stubborn human survivor? It's like a fairy tale. You think you're real, but you're still in the script." Kareth lunged. Vorik activated the kill protocol. A wave of heat blasted through the room as sentry turrets unfolded from the walls. Plasma bolts screamed across the chamber. Ren ducked, dragged Tvik behind a console, and returned fire with one of Kareth's backup pistols. Kareth didn't retreat. She charged. Blades, spinning armor flashing with each blow, she carved through synthetic guards, leapt over fire, and launched herself onto Vorik's platform. He fired at point blank, but she was faster. She took the blast to her side, shrieked, and drove her blade through the console in front of him. Sparks exploded. Power died. Vorik stumbled back, reaching for another weapon, too late. Kareth's second blade pressed to his throat. "You're done." But then a hiss. From above, a final turret dropped, swiveling directly at Ren and Tvik. A flash. Kareth turned just in time and threw herself in front of it. The bolt struck her clean across the torso. She crumpled instantly. Ren screamed, emptying the pistol into the turret, ripping it apart in a shower of sparks. Silence fell. Kareth lay on the ground, chest scorched, blood pooling. Ren was at her side in seconds, fumbling through his gear. No, damn it, no!" Tvik handed him something. A silver injector. One of Kareth's. Alien. Unfamiliar. But filled with regenerative serum she'd once told him could raise fire from ash. He plunged it into her neck. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Her body convulsed, her blood igniting with bioluminescence. Then her back arched and the light spread into Ren. His veins glowed, his eyes flared with heat, and something impossible bonded. A link. Not just biological, symbiotic. The fire passed between them, and when it faded, she opened her eyes. So did he. And nothing, would ever be the same again. For a moment, nothing moved. Kareth's breathing was shallow, the skin along her neck still glowing faintly from the serum. Ren knelt beside her, fingers trembling as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. He could feel her pulse in his own chest racing and raw. His vision wavered at the edges, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper shared, a tether. Her blood now moved through him, not entirely, but enough to change them both. Kareth blinked slowly, and for the first time since Varela 7, she looked afraid not of death, but of what had taken its place. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice dry and broken. Ren stared at his hands. They were still his, and yet weren't. "I saved you," he said softly. "I think." They didn't have time to understand it. The control room's secondary systems kicked back online with a mechanical whine. Emergency lights strobed across the corridor. Outside the dome, the facility's stabilizers began to fail. Kareth's earlier blade strike had compromised the main circuit conduit. Smoke leaked from the cracked console. Power conduits sparked overhead. Vorik Dahl groaned, pinned beneath a collapsed support beam. He was bleeding from the head, but not unconscious. Not yet. Kareth pushed herself upright, wincing as new strength surged through her limbs. She was healing, but not naturally. Not the way her kind was supposed to. Something in the bond had changed her. Changed him. Ren turned to Vorik. "You're going to confess," he said, rising to his feet. "Every hunt, every cover-up. You're going to give us access to your entire off-world data relay." Vorik coughed, his face pale with fury and disbelief. "You idiots don't understand what you've done," he rasped. "You think I'm the architect, I'm a servant. Crux Lux has roots in every system. I was just feeding the machine. You destroy me, another takes my place. Then we'll burn the whole machine," Kareth said. She stepped closer, one hand clutching her side, the other raised with her final blade angled downward. Vorik flinched. Ren stopped her. "No," he said. "That's what he wants. Die a martyr. Be remembered as the monster who couldn't be tamed." He leaned down inches from Vorik's face. "You don't get that luxury." He pulled the encrypted chip from the data relay. "We're going to show the galaxy exactly who you are." Kareth turned to Ren, eyes searching. "We can't transmit from here. The comm satellites are jammed, controlled from orbit." "I know, but there's a fallback." He tapped his own wristband, now glowing faintly from the bond. "Your module connected to their deep relay ports. Tvik said there was an emergency beacon link in the vault beneath this structure. A hard line. No filters. No sensors." Kareth nodded slowly. "We get it there. We send the data." And then she asked. He looked at her. "We run." They found the vault 2 levels down past rows of cryo coffins and biometric scan stations long abandoned. Ren forced open the last door with a heat-welded pry bar, and inside they found the terminal ancient analog, but connected to a direct signal relay buried deep beneath the planet's crust. Ren loaded the chip. Kareth stood beside him, watching every byte upload to the Accord's neutral satellites far beyond Crux Lux's reach. Tvik stared at the screen with wide eyes as names and images flickered across victims' bets, private contracts, kill footage. It was horrifying. It was truth. When the upload completed, Ren leaned back. "It's done." Outside the dome was collapsing. Explosions rocked the terrain, sending tremors through the walls. The facility was dying, but the evidence lived. Kareth turned to Ren, her breath shaking. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You changed me. We're connected now." Ren looked down at his arms, still tingling with the bond's afterglow. "Yeah," he said. "I feel it too." Their eyes met, and in that gaze was something neither of them had ever dared to want. Trust. Not born of alliance, but of survival, of sacrifice, of something earned. They ran from the dome together as the roof caved in behind them. Fire and steel fell like rain. They dove through the final exit shaft, slid down a collapsing tunnel, and emerged onto the icy plains just as the facility imploded in a shower of light and debris. Behind them, the dome was gone. So was Vorik. So was the hunt. Kareth dropped to her knees in the snow, panting. Ren collapsed beside her, bloodied and shaking but alive. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. For the first time, the sky above Varela 7 looked different, wide open, endless clean. They weren't hunter and prey anymore. They were survivors. And their story had just begun. The signal reached the stars before the fire had even cooled. It bypassed Vorik Dahl's corrupted satellites, skipped through proxy shields and illegal firewalls, and landed squarely, indisputably, on the front steps of the Interstellar Accord Tribunal. By the time the first official envoy reached Varela 7, the dome was a crater. The footage had already gone viral on every secure channel, every whistleblower network, every system that once pretended Crux Lux was too big to touch. They were wrong. Kareth stood on a cliff overlooking the burn zone, her armor scorched, her blade slung low. Below, emergency response ships touched down on the fractured ice, their hulls marked with the tribunal's seal. Human, alien, and hybrid delegates poured out, judges, journalists, officers. And for the first time in decades, the galaxy listened. Ren stood beside her, arms crossed, his breath steaming in the cold. He looked different now, not just older or harder, but more. The bond still shimmered faintly beneath his skin when the sun caught it right. Kareth could feel his heartbeat if she stood too close. Sometimes it echoed in her own chest. They hadn't spoken much since the explosion. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had changed. Below them, Tvik spoke rapidly with a tribunal translator, gesturing toward the ruins, the data core, the vault. He was no longer the last runner. He was witness. A week later, Crux Lux collapsed. Accounts were frozen. Dignitaries arrested. Hunters turned themselves in. Dozens of planetary systems cut ties overnight, ashamed, enraged, galvanized. Trials began almost immediately. Vorik Dahl's name was cursed in 8 languages and outlawed in 2. But no one could erase the footage. No one could ignore Kareth's face as she stood over the kill protocol console, wounded but unbroken. No one could forget the image of Ren cradling her body as fire consumed the control tower, refusing to leave her behind. They became symbols, not by choice, by truth. The Accord offered them titles, wealth, positions of influence. They refused. But one offer they didn't turn down. It came from a woman named Sarai Kef, head of the Tribunal's Sentient Rights Division. "We're forming a new agency," she said. "Not another intelligence bureau, not an army, a shield." Kareth raised an eyebrow. A shield against what? Against everything Crux Lux built in the shadows. Against every black site, every off-world game, every powerful creature who still thinks blood is entertainment. Ren glanced at Kareth. She nodded once. That's how the Sentience Preservation Initiative was born. Headquartered on a rotating habitat near the border worlds, the initiative was small at first. Just 20 agents. Most were survivors. Some were former hunters defectors, seeking redemption. Others were born in the aftermath, children of the lost. Kareth and Ren were given code names, Echo Fire and Glasswolf. They declined. They were done with aliases. They were something else now. Together they trained others, built missions, flew into danger not to win, but to protect. And when word spread that the two who took down Vorik Dahl were now guarding the broken edges of the galaxy, predators paused, and survivors dared to hope. One evening, weeks after their first mission under the Initiative's banner, Kareth sat on the observation deck of their ship, the Ashlight. Ren joined her, 2 mugs of steaming brew in his hands. He passed her one. They drank in silence. Below them, a blue-green world spun peacefully. No blood, no hunt, just light. Ren broke the quiet first. "Do you think we'll ever stop running from what we were?" Kareth didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to him, her hand brushing his warm, steady alive. "I'm not running," she said. I'm rewriting." He smiled. So did she. And together they watched the stars, not as hunter and prey, not even as survivors, but as something new. Partners, lovers, legends. And in the shadows of space, the old blood-sport empires shivered because they knew the hunted had become the protectors. And this time the galaxy would never forget. Enjoyed the hunted and the hunter? Then don't let this story fade into the snow. If Kareth and Ren's journey from prey to protectors pulled you in, help us keep the fire burning. Like the video to let the algorithm know stories like this matter. Share it with friends who love sci-fi action and redemption arcs. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next mission, because their story isn't over. Ashlight Protocol is coming. Hit the bell so you're the first to know when the next chapter drops. Because some legends are just getting started.